Heartbreak. The words pierced her heart as they had so many times in the past. Where had the man gone who vowed to love and cherish her? She seethed, slamming the phone on the desk. A tear hit the notepad and bled into the fibers of the yellow-lined paper. Had Edward's passion been another woman, Margaret would have known how to retaliate. But his lust for power and money was his mistress. Exhausted, Margaret collapsed onto the sapphire velvet desk chair. Leaning onto the desk, she studied her reflection in the polished mahogany surface. A drawn, haggard face with lifeless eyes met her gaze. Horrified by the sight, she covered her eyes. Unchecked sobs echoed throughout the empty Georgian mansion. Her body shuddered with sorrow until she had no more tears to cry. Through the open door, she could see the dining room table set for two. White tapers in a Waterford crystal vase filled with fresh red roses added a touch of romance. It looked exactly like she had envisioned. Everything worked according to her plan. The cook was at a concert. Edward's favorite chicken marsala was in the warmer. She had hoped that maybe a couple of glasses of wine and soft music in the house themselves would rekindle the magic. But again, he disappointed her. She was tired of the pretense and of eating alone. It only underscored the absurdity of the relationship. Edward insisted that they dine formally, although he rarely ate a meal at home. Night after night she had her dinner, seated at the head of an ornate 15-foot hand-carved table. She hungered for the days when all that they had were their love, hopes, and dreams. Thoughts of peanut butter sandwiches on the beach and candlelit spaghetti dinners curled the corners of her lips up ever so slightly. She longed to be held and kissed by the man who picked flowers in the park and told her that their beauty paled in comparison to hers. Appetite gone, all she wanted was to lay her head on her pillow and put an end to another miserable day. Had she the courage, she would go to sleep and make sure she would never wake up. She flipped the switch to the right of the dark-stained panel door and shut it behind her. The foyer's grandeur was imported. Italian marble floor, magnificent mahogany stairway that wrapped around 2/3 of the room, and the 5-foot crystal chandelier hanging in the center escaped her. All she saw was emptiness and loneliness. Barely noticing the coolness of the stone beneath her bare feet, she shivered from a cold that penetrated her bones. How could he put work ahead of her on their 15th anniversary? He had promised to take her to Bermuda for a few days. Just the two of them, away from the calls, texts, and email. Knowing the answer but not wanting to confront it, she gathered the strength and ascended the head of the stairs on the right. Edward's was on the left at the other end of the hallway. 2 guest rooms with baths separated them. It had been months since Edward paid her conjugal visit. They were strangers living under the same roof. When she reached her room, she swung open the door but did not enter. The sitting room was perfect, decorated by the best designers, or at least those in vogue. Washington's elite used them, so Edward followed the pack. The furniture was French provincial with rosy satin brocade upholstery. The pieces were not covered in clear plastic, but they made her feel uneasy as if they were. Margaret imagined the room filled with fluffy, oversized chairs, the kind she could curl up in, and her grandmother's Afghan thrown over the back of one, those chilly nights. She missed being surrounded by things that reminded her of home. Margaret thought of the 2-story Victorian dollhouse she loved as a child. 2 white rockers sat on the wraparound porch for the mother and father. They would meet to chat when the kids were in bed for the night. Margaret's favorite childhood pastime was to bring her dolls to life. She created loving interactions and she maneuvered her family through everyday scenarios, never doubting that her dollhouse world would be her life when she grew up. There would be a father. She would be the mother. They would have a son, a daughter, a dog, and a cat. Margaret's chest heaved with a heavy sigh. The harsh reality is that Edward and she had become the plastic people that were able to sit, stand, or lie down, but not to feel. She was no longer able to craft the loving relationship that she wanted. Almost robotic, their occasional conversations had been reduced to the polite bantering of strangers. Her life was out of her hands, a runaway train that she could not stop or control. Edward had set the course, launching her on a path with no return. Sleep and alcohol had been her only escapes. Fearing addiction, she battled the drinking and worked out every day for the past 2 months. Tonight, her hopes that Edward would notice were crushed with a mere phone call. There was nothing more she could do. She had lost him. The marriage was finished. She would just have to resign herself to the fact. Margaret ventured over the threshold. The ruby-red carpet was almost sensuous between her toes as her mere 110 pounds sunk into the pile with each step. Unbuttoning her blouse, she made her way to the dressing room. Sleep would not come too soon. Spent, she no longer wanted to face her failures. Margaret pulled her clothes off and tossed them into a chute that led to the laundry room below. Naked, she stood alone, surrounded by 6 images of herself, each Margaret bared to the soul. All the eyes bore the pain that she felt. She turned around and around. Each image was pretty, petite, a few weeks shy of 40 years old. None had the stretch marks of giving birth. Their breasts were firm, their abdomens flat, and their buttocks tight, still in great shape. And yet, she stood on the edge of a bottomless black hole, rejected by the only man she had ever loved. If she allowed herself to slip into the abyss, she may never be able to climb out. Margaret lifted a thick, white, fluffy terror rope from the hook on the back of the door and slipped into it, wrapping the belt tightly around her waist. As her hand clasped the bedroom doorknob, the partially packed suitcase and luggage rack in the closet caught her eye. The new bikini she bought for Bermuda was on top, the bright Caribbean print screaming for attention. She picked it up and admired it. Edward would have been shocked, maybe a little embarrassed when she wore it in public, but she was desperate to win him back. She thought if she turned a few heads, maybe he would pay attention. A selection of new lace teddies and silk nightgowns completed her arsenal. Throwing the bikini back with the rest, she thought about what a waste of time, effort, and money it all was. "Damn it!" she yelled, slamming the suitcase shut. The rage rose within her until she thought her head would explode. She stormed into the bedroom, yanked the phone book from the bottom shelf of the nightstand, and threw it onto the bed with such force that it slid across the pink and green flowered satin bedspread to the other side, where it teetered on the edge. She tossed the cordless phone beside it, belly flopping onto the bed as she flipped through the yellow pages until she reached the listing for cabs and then punched the number onto the keypad. For the first time in years, she felt she had control over her life. It was time to make some decisions. She dressed quickly in a pair of lightweight, pale yellow slacks and a white short-sleeved cotton sweater with a matching cardigan. Her lined hunter green trench coat topped the outfit to protect her from the early spring chill until she reached the airport. After that, she planned to need nothing more than a bathing suit, a sundress, shorts, and a t-shirt. She closed the 3 suitcases she had packed and shuttled them one at a time to the front door. By the time she dragged the last one down the stairs, the cabbie was leaning on the doorbell. "Airport?" he said in a thick accent she couldn't identify. She nodded, unable to speak. As he loaded the bags in the taxi, Margaret turned to say goodbye to the empty house. A tear trickled down her cheek. There was not a living soul there, not one that would miss her. Vindictively, she walked out of the house, leaving the front door open wide, and smiled at the thought of Edward running from room to room, checking to see if any of his precious possessions had been stolen. The harsh reality was that it would probably be days before he noticed her absence. The cold wind slapped her face and tugged at her coat as she rushed to the waiting car. Without looking back, she climbed through the open door held by the dark-skinned driver wearing an orange knit ski cap. The door slammed behind her. Burying her face in her hands, she silently sobbed, unable to control the violent shaking that overtook her body. The cabbie opened the door to the driver's seat and positioned himself behind the wheel. Checking his rear-view mirror, he saw the crumpled woman in the back seat and regretted grabbing another fare for the night. He could have gone home to his small 5th-floor apartment that he shared with his wife and 4 children, popped open a beer, stretched out in his recliner, and left this nutty rich lady for someone else. Had the address not been in the wealthiest part of the city where all the big tippers live, he would have done just that. Just his luck. His wacko would probably stiff him. Fearing that she might do something crazy in this cab, he asked, "Miss, okay?" Margaret nodded without looking up. Shrugging it off as a woman's monthly emotional problems, he put the idling automobile into gear and drove down the circular tree-lined drive to the street. Within minutes, they were on the freeway heading to the airport. When the chill subsided, Margaret leaned back and rested her head against the seat. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, trying to relax and regain self-control. Now that she had made the decision to leave, she was determined to be strong, able to stand on her own 2 feet as she had before she met Edward. If she were to go back now, he'd never know that she had gone. But that would be quitting. Taking the easy way out because she was scared to make it on her own. No, she had to do this. She couldn't face another miserable day in this world. The tires hummed as they rolled over the highway, thumping at regular intervals where two sections of pavement met. Lulled by the sound and the gentle sway of the cab, Margaret drifted into a deep, relaxed state, one of peace and well-being.